Hi everyone, and welcome to a bit of a back to basics episode, but hopefully with a bit of something new thrown in for good measure. As you may know, I was a child of the 80s and was firmly in the Sinclair camp, having been given a ZX Spectrum 16K for Christmas in 1982, and I absolutely loved it, and soon managed to claw enough money together to upgrade to the 48K version. I sold my 16K and bought a 48K, as I hadn't at that point embraced the joys of soldering. I had that 48K Spectrum for a good couple of years before, in my mind at least, upgrading to an Amstrad CPC 464 with a green screen monitor. I didn't really care about the lack of colour because I was enthralled by the new keyboard, integrated tape player, and Locomotive Basic seemed much more powerful and easier to type in than Sinclair Basic. So I missed out on the Spectrum Plus. I didn't see the need, as it wasn't technically any different to the 48K I had, and to be honest, I quite like the rubber keys of the original. So last year, when it came time for my then Spectrum to go to computer heaven, having had an argument with a cup of water, I sought out a Spectrum Plus so I could see what I missed out on. You've seen it in the channel in a few guest appearances, and I've been threatening a refurb for a while. Also, if you remember, when I built my own Spectrum earlier this year, it had a nice modern S-video out, and I thought this would be cool to have on my Spectrum Plus 2 so I can use the same cable. Right, lots to do, so let's crack on. So here's the old girl ready for a makeover, and the first thing to note is this super wobbly spacebar. Now this could be something really bad like actual broken bits that need repairing, or it could simply be the metal stabilisation bar coming unhooked. Either way, we'll need to sort that out. This Spectrum has had a composite mod done to it, but as I said, the picture's really bad. Washed out colours and quite dark, which is usually a sign of bad caps or a bad job. Again, that needs sorting, and to that end I'm looking to build and install this S-video board which replaces the modulator entirely. It's a fiddly kit with very small SMD parts, so that could go either way, but hopefully when done I'll be able to use this S-video to SCART cable and get a nice clear picture. So the very first thing we're going to need to do is to get inside and take a look at what we're dealing with here. All the screws for the Spectrum Plus are on the bottom, and once they're whipped out we need to gently unplug the keyboard membrane from the mainboard. Now this is always something to take care with. This machine has a new membrane already, so the plastic is in good condition, but older membranes can be quite brittle and easy to break. Once inside, we can see that someone's had a go at recapping this board in the past, as these are radial capacitors and not the original axial capacitors that would have shipped with the machine. There's no real performance difference, but they normally do have space limitations, which mean you have to be creative when fitting radials into a space meant for axials. Here's the RF modulator that is largely redundant since the composite mod has been performed, and we'll be whipping that out and replacing it with our S-video board, which will occupy the same footprint. The previous owner has already removed the 7805 voltage regulator and the heatsink and replaced it with this Traco unit, and that's a good thing as these don't generate any heat and they're very reliable. We'll take out the motherboard now, and first of all we need to pop out this reset switch. It's not glued in, so should come out with a little wiggle. There are only a couple of screws that hold the mainboard in place, so let's get those out of the way next. And here we can see a really good view of those radial capacitors, soon to be replaced by these bad boys from Retroleum. There's a link in the description, and they're really good value and include all the extra bits in case you want to do a composite mod yourself, and also the extra caps required if you have an issue 2 board. Ours is an issue 6A, so we won't be needing those. When taking out any soldered part using my vacuum pump, I always like to add a bit of fresh solder to the joints first to help the solder flow. It really can make a difference. The solder here on these caps is probably not that old, but will reflow anyway as it's just good practice. When it came to reflowing the bottom of the joints, I found a nasty surprise. Someone had left the leg of a capacitor attached. This could have caused untold damage if it had shorted out across the back of the board. So we'll clip that off anyway, and then we may as well start the recapping here. I'm using an electric desoldering pump, which makes relatively short work of removing the solder from through holes. If you've got a manual pump, you can still do the job, it's just a bit more fiddly. With the new capacitor ready to go in, note that unlike radial caps where one leg is longer than the other to denote the positive, With axial caps, you can tell by the direction of the arrow on the body, and by the little bump on the leg where it enters the body. Both signify the negative leg of the capacitor. It's always worth checking the orientation of the old caps first as well, and replace the new caps in the same way. Some machines do have errors on their PCB silkscreens, so always worth double checking. A quick dab of fresh solder to fix the new cap in place, and then snip the legs off, and you'll note on my soldering mat there are a lot of cut off legs from previous projects. I tend to keep them for repairing traces or bridging links. Now I'm sure you don't want to watch me do this in real time, so let's time lapse this to some funky music. As you can see, I was losing the light from the window as this job went on, but I finished just in time. I like to work in natural light wherever I can, I'm just odd like that. Anyway, the board turned out really nicely, but it didn't improve the display in any way whatsoever. But that's fine, because we've got this S-Video board to build, remember? And that's going to help by separating the luma and chroma signals and giving them each their own channel through to the TV, reducing interference and hopefully providing a much cleaner picture with little to no dot crawl. Now, my earlier statement about using the same cable as for my home-built Spectrum is clearly stupid and most regretful. I will forever hang my head. That Spectrum outputs a true RGB signal, so, totally different. Oh well, moving on. The components on this board are really tiny surface mounts and are really fiddly. I'm having to use my trusty microscope here to check positioning and that the final joints are good. I also have a pair of glasses on that make me look like Mr. Magoo, but then these parts, as I said, are really tiny. If you don't want to be soldering this yourself, you can buy the already built units, there's a link in the description. But hey, I like a challenge, and I bought enough components to make 3 of these, so that's 3 chances to get it right. Again, I'm sure you don't want to watch me squint and curse for half an hour, so let's magically time travel. Whoosh! And there we have it, the completed board ready to solder in a few wires and then pop in for a test. I'm quite excited about this, as it certainly looks like a nice piece of kit, and I'm very hopeful that I've not messed up the build, as quite honestly I don't fancy squinting that hard for another half hour so soon. Before we fit the board, we need to pop some Kapton tape to the main board of the Spectrum where the modulator fitted before, and also clip all of the pins on the bottom of this board as close to the PCB as possible in order that we don't get any shorts from this unit to the main board. So I guess all there is left to do at this point is test it out. So here goes, drum roll please, and well, that could be worse. I have a display at least, but it is very dark. Now that could either be that I've messed up a capacitor somewhere, so I'll double check all of those, or it could be the transistors at TR1 and TR2, and I don't have any spares of those, so off shopping I go. Let's move on to something else in the meantime. And that something else is the keyboard and that wobbly spacebar. Let's take a look and see what's wrong. There are 400 billion screws holding the keyboard membrane in place, so we'll whiz through that and then carefully lift out the membrane itself, and it's not too long before we see the problem. The metal stabilisation bar is designed to transfer vertical forces across the width of the bar, so that pressing one end down makes the other end go down too. But for that to happen, of course, it needs to be attached, and on our little spacebar here, the plastic bits that the bar clips into have broken off. let's see if we can't jewelry rig something so that we don't have to buy a new spacebar. And I'm thinking that I'll just heat up some wire, push it through the uprights and then bend it all into position. Quick, dirty and hopefully very effective. And here's the result. As I say, it's not pretty, but it looks like it should do the job, so let's pop it in and give it a little test. Lovely! Right, with the spacebar fixed, I found I didn't actually need to go shopping after all. I had some spare transistors, so I'll quickly swap them out and see if that makes any difference. And yes, I have an image, but it's now in black and white, and really not that much better. However, this is now S-video out, so that's progress, I guess. Now, when examining the PCB under the microscope, there were some lifted pads not giving good contact, and also some dodgy dry joints. So after about an hour of mucking about, I'd patched all of the bad circuits and rerouted everything to clean vias, and yep, it was still black and white. So thought I'd just try it on my old CRT monitor, as modern tellies are a bit more picky over the SCART signal than they are over composite, and yes, on the CRT we're getting a colour S-video signal. It's not perfect, so there's still a little bit of work to do, but it does lead me to a conclusion about the Specky and this particular mod. And that is, be prepared to have to undo it all if your telly doesn't like it, or just use a CRT and you'll be fine. Personally, I'm going to put this old girl back to composite because that works on everything, and with the recap we should have a nice solid picture. Back in a tick. Luckily it doesn't take as long to reverse, and I'll definitely try this on a few different TVs at some point. But it's important for me to have machines that work on the TV on my test bench, and with this installed it doesn't. That's not to say it's a bad product, it's just not a good fit for me in my circumstances. Your mileage may of course vary. The only other thing I want to do to this machine is to give it a bit of a clean, and of course there's no need for a retro bright as it's jet black anyway. The Spectrum Plus is a really easy machine to clean as it's so angular and easy to get to all of the parts that gather dust. I hope you've enjoyed the journey, and I hope it gives an insight into some of the issues you may have if you're attempting to do this yourself on one of your own machines, and you can make an informed decision knowing the effort, time and cost to do it. There are of course some solutions such as the ZX HD which will allow an HDMI output from a humble Spectrum, but at around £90 it's an expensive option, and you may just want to spend that money instead on a Spectrum with an RGB output built in, basically the 128K toast rack and upwards, or build your own Spectrum of course. The wonderful thing about these old machines is that people are still making these mods and add-ons, always trying to get the best out of the machine and to keep them going in the modern world. Right, I'm going to pop this old girl back onto her display shelf until the next time I need to test something. I tend to use my home built Spectrum when I want to play games, or my Next of course. Glad I did the recap and noticed that stray leg sticking out, and also glad I patched up the mainboard, dodgy traces and pads, hopefully keep her going for another 30 years. If you do decide to have a go at fitting one of these boards, please let us know in the comments what your level of success was and what TV you tried it on, as that may help others to know what to expect before heading out on the journey. If you like the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications of new content. If you'd like to help support the channel, hit the join button for details on how to do that. And of course, please leave your comments as we always love to read them. So until next time in the shack, ta-ta for now.